So we're moving on to our panel section of our event here. So we had some founder stories. We have 3 panels coming up. We're going to talk about Web3 infrastructure, Web3 apps, and then we're going to go to Web3 investing, and we'll have our keynote. So welcome our guests. They're going to introduce themselves, and we're going to have a great conversation. If there's some time, we'll open it up to you all for some questions as well. All right? Give these guys a round of applause.
Testing. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a good lunch. I'm Ibrahim with Founders Inc. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists. We have Atif from Stardust. Go ahead. And then we have Luv from Coinbase and Antonio from Spindle. You guys want to go ahead and talk about what you're working on?
Do I start?
Sure.
Hey, so it's weird being on a Web3 panel. I just got to this party, and yet somehow I'm on the panel. So long history in Web2, early Facebook. Wrote a book called Chaos Monkeys you might have heard of. Recently got crypto pilled and raised money for a startup. Isn't public yet, but Furcon and Founders is in the round, as is Coinbase actually. And working on attribution and user acquisition for Web3.
Hey guys, Luv Kothari, product lead at Coinbase, leading some of the products in Coinbase Cloud. And also long-time Web2, actually started as a semiconductor engineer, built chips way back for iPhone and whatnot. Then worked at Google for many years building AI ML products. And now I'm Coinbase and leading some of the cloud products.
Cool. My name is Atif, Chief Operating Officer at Stardust. We are a custodial solution for developers to integrate NFTs and tokens into their games. Prior to that, also very early, Facebook spent 8 years helping build a games business.
All right, so the topic of this panel is infrastructure and foundation. So Web3 is really early on. When you think of Web2, there's a lot of mature infrastructure out there. We have advertising infrastructure, cloud hosting, and everything in between. So the next chapter of Web3 is going to need to be built from the ground up. We want to onboard the next billion users, and that's going to take great infrastructure. So everyone has a different opinion about how far along we are in Web3. And a lot of bears will say Web3 is a problem looking for a solution. But we have some panelists up here who are trying to build that infrastructure to find those problems. And so we're going to give them a chance to basically talk about what it is that they're solving at their organizations. Atif, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so actually very similar product to Third Web, but if you heard James earlier, a little bit of a different solution in the way that we're approaching it. For us, very similar to Third Web, one of our key theses is that game developers shouldn't have to learn the complexities of Rust and Solidity to actually build blockchain games. And then from a user's perspective, this is where we differ a little bit. We have a fully custodial solution. We don't believe that users should have to learn the complexities of MetaMask or Phantom Wallet to be in a blockchain game, or frankly even know that they're in a blockchain game. When you look at what made mobile gaming so successful, it was my grandmother in Pakistan could play Candy Crush. Right? That's what onboarded 100 million users onto mobile. And so from our thought process, we feel like our solution is going to help do that as well.
Custodial definitely helps onboard a lot of users. And we know Coinbase, probably the biggest custodial exchange in the world right now. You want to talk a little bit about what's going on?
Talk about our take on it, right? So most people think of Coinbase as this retail exchange and whatnot, right? And I think one of our mission is to bring economic freedom to the world. And much of the work so far has been more on the retail side of things. And what we have a metaphor at Coinbase, which is, we're trying to make a bridge from Web2 to Web3 and bring like the next billion users on it. But there's the other side of that, right? What is on the other side of the bridge? Like there's an island, but we need to have something in that island like that's meaningful for these users these people to go there. And that's where the developer side of Coinbase that we are sort of putting a lot more effort into is coming in place. So there, we are taking a much sort of a broader approach, so to speak, right? We are of course building a lot of primitives. So we think of this as things that would be useful for people to build their apps and like next set of applications. So anything from access to blockchains to custodial solutions to like trading, identity, on-ramps to off-ramp and on-ramps to the real world. And that's kind of how we're thinking about it. In very early days, is what I would say. Like when I come here and see like so much is happening in the space, there is a lot more developer tooling that's needed to be built here. So that's kind of getting clear to me.
Yeah, hey, I mean, from my point of view, like what you said, a solution looking for a problem, it's funny, you could say that about every transformative technology we've had for the past half century. There's roughly 20 years between the first email getting sent and Hotmail launching. There's roughly 20 years before the transistor getting invented in 1945 and it actually be used in microchips, 20 years between the microchip and the PC. It more or less characterizes every major technological shift. That there was this weird little toy that seemed kind of interesting, but it wasn't quite clear what it would do, and it took a while. So to me, that isn't really a big ding. If you ask me the question, Ibrahim, where are we when it comes to things like attribution? I'm going to use the word ads, sorry, but hate to break it to you, you've already got ads in Web3. They're called NFT drops. Those are ads. Hate to break it to you, it's a piece of paid media, and you drive user action, you just can't track it, which is what Spindle hopes to solve, but you're already there. But where I would say Web3 is when it comes to that is like the 90s, maybe. It's literally the earliest possible days.
For folks who might not know what attribution means on the web, can you give them a...
I'll answer the question with a question. What was your ROI on that NFT drop? What was the retention rate after the fact? What is your retention rate now? What is your user acquisition cost for your token drop, for example? Those are all the questions that an attribution system would sort of solve. And how that gets solved is very complicated. But those are the questions that currently have no answers in Web3 that we would hope to answer.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when we're thinking about attribution, how is Spindle going to try and tackle some of those challenges?
Oh God, do you really want me to talk my book? Okay, I feel like such a shill now. Well, it's complicated, right? Because you've got the whole Web 2 world in which the world that we've operated in, identity is kind of a solved problems. You have device ID, you have click tracking, you've got cookies. And then on the Web 3 side, it's weird. You've got wallet IDs, which are persistent, but not tied to actual identity. So step one, obviously, is, like it or not, joining those two identity worlds. Like, here's the killer primitive that Web3 needs and that, frankly, we're building as V1. You click on a link anywhere, that user, days later, goes and does a thing on chain, and we actually tie those two together and show you that in a way that makes sense to you, like, oh, this is the conversion rate on that Discord post, or that tweet, or that conference, for example, or anything else, which again, you just don't have that now. So that's step one. There's a lot more behind that, but that's step one.
And then Atif, when you're thinking about gaming, and you say, developers shouldn't have to know Solidity or Rust, where's the right balance between keeping things decentralized, but also making it easy enough for the users so that they don't feel too bogged down by all the complexity that comes with onboarding on Web3 today?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you think about making a game is so difficult, right? Like, one, there's no rhyme or reason as to why a game is successful, and then you have a really tough time making another successful hit, right? Look at Supercell. They had these $2 billion franchises and haven't been able to make another good game in like 8 years, right? And so that alone, that process of game design, building audiences, serving the right content to those audiences is so difficult. And then you have the user acquisition part, right? That's just the front end, you have the back end on top of that. And so if you add another complexity where they have to learn a new language to do something that's not core to their business, you add a hurdle that makes it difficult for them to actually be successful, right? And so as we think about developer tools, or as we think about tools in Web3, the things that we should be thinking about is how do we make it easier for people to do their core jobs well, right? Not make it harder. And I think that's where more infrastructure is going to be really important, because you want people to focus on the things that they do well and allow you to like make the onboarding for everything else easier.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, a lot of critics, when they see a Web3 game, and some technical people will open the browser console and they'll look and see, oh, it looks like this is hitting an API, right? Is someone sitting in the middle here? But if it improves the user experience, it could be worth it for some users, and for some games, they're willing to make that compromise.
Yeah, and my controversial take on stage right now is there's not really any Web3 games, because the core tenet of a game is that it's fun. That's why people play games. If you're not making a fun game, nobody gives a shit about your NFT drop. Nobody cares about the financial incentives that you give them. Nobody cares about what people go to games to do is have fun. It's entertainment. And so now with this little bit of a bear, what's interesting is that game developers are actually coming in and building fun experiences, because that's what's going to be successful.
Makes sense. So now, if we're thinking about infrastructure with Web3, outside of tokens and doing NFT drops where you may sell an NFT, how are your teams thinking about monetization in Web3? I'll leave this one for anyone to pick up.
I mean, I can tell you what our future customers are saying. I mean, they're spending money on Web 2, right? But you ask them, like, what's your ROI on your Facebook or YouTube user acquisition spend? And they have literally no idea. They're just firing money into the breeze and hoping that it actually converts. That's the reality right now. I mean, if you want my very, like, mercenary Machiavellian ad tech degen take, it's like, if Web3 wants 1 billion people on Web3, they've got to drink the Web2 user milkshake and use the very tools that Web2 has to basically get all those users and bring them on Web3. And the only way to do that is not weird little coin tribalism, little NFT pump and dump schemes. Like, none of that shit matters to the average normal user. Like you said, they want to come to a game and do cool shit that they can't do on Web2. So build that, right? And abstract away a lot of the complexity from the crypto side of things, which again, to the average user, if you want 1 billion users playing your game, they're not going to care about that.
Yeah, and like back to the ad side, if you think about what's going on in Web 2 right now, you essentially have a turf war between Facebook and Apple around privacy, right? And really what it is like Apple's guys' take of taking market share from an ad spend on Facebook. And what that's doing is you're getting shittier ads in your newsfeed, on your Google, and it's only going to get worse on Google. If you think about the use case that somebody in Web 3 has, everything is on chain, everything is transparent. You get all of that data back that Apple is taking away from you. And so imagine how much more powerful if you can connect that Web 2 identity to Web 3 is for the ads in the ecosystem.
Right. It sounds like we still work for Facebook, by the way, but so we don't. We definitely don't work for Apple. In any case, but just to be clear, when I mention ads, like, it's not reproducing the Google and Facebook crappiness and the whole duopoly inside Web3. Because again, like, one of the things I did at Facebook, and it's in the book and all that, is like championing programmatic ad technology, which sounds creepy and weird, but it's like way better than the alternative, right? Which is there's this siloed thing that you don't control and you don't know, and one company controls it all. And the promise of much of that technology is what we would now call permissionlessness and transparency and all the rest of it. But it didn't quite turn out that way for a bunch of reasons that I won't bore you with. But the thing is, Web3 actually does have the promise where exactly what you just said, Atif, which is that, like, oh, that data is actually public. Like, if you spend $100 to acquire 10 users, like, you can see that, right? Right now, there is so much murkiness, there's so much grift, there's so much, like, nastiness inside that acquisition world. Web3 can be a very different user acquisition landscape. I hope it is, at least.
The only thing I'll add is, like, I feel we don't know how you make money in Web3 yet. Like, that is very similar to early days of Web2. We did not know how build an amazing search engine like Google. Google did not know how they can actually monetize it. And I feel like that's what the focus should be, building user value. And once you have that, to your point, like, you build an amazing game, you will figure out a way to make money out of that. A lot of the stuff happening in the infra layer is about building tools that people can use. And I think there, the monetization model is much simpler. You can charge for it, you have a premium model. That layer is simpler, but if you still think about, like, actual applications being built, you have to still focus on user acquisition and actually creating value for them. And I think the business models will evolve and they will probably be derived from Web2, but different. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think that mindset that we have to figure out the monetization piece is coming from, like, VCs and investors. Like, it took years for people to monetize social media, right? The key should be on board the next 100, 200, 300 million users, and they will show you how they want to be monetized or how you will monetize them over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the weird things between Web 2 and Web 3, right? That, like, in Web 2, you'd build a thing, get a viral consumer use case, and then figure out how to monetize it later. Which, by the way, we all take that as an assumption now, but when I was at Facebook, the ad system sucked. Like, the CPMs were terrible. The thing didn't work, basically. And we struggled for years to make that thing work. I mean, Uber just had its only profitable quarter now, fucking, 14, 15 years into it? And so it's like, somehow we all got used to the fact that you build this thing, but you actually can't pay for it, and you have to figure out how to pay for it. Web 3 is the opposite. Like, there's almost too much liquidity and money in it, but there's actually not that many viral consumer use cases. So you kind of have to flip that around a little bit and find the use case first, and then, like, not to say the money will take care of itself, but we can wrap a business model if there's eyeballs. It's hard to do the reverse. Yeah.
It's something my friend Joe Khan says all the time. One of the worst things that can happen to a company is sometimes going public. And one of the worst things that can happen to a crypto company is launching a token right away, right? Because then your focus is on driving value to the token and not necessarily building a business that's going to drive value to your consumers and your users.
Yeah, so thinking about onboarding the next few hundred million users, it's starting to get really crowded on chains like Ethereum. We felt it in the bull market in 2021. Gas was a bit ridiculous. Some transactions wouldn't go through for hours and days at a time. So are we living in a multi-chain world, and what does that look like when you're positioning your teams about thinking about the future and trying to target what feels like an infinite list of growing chains. More and more looking at it every day.
Yeah, so we have a really interesting philosophy as a company. Like 9 months ago when I started, everybody would laugh at us. We're not a blockchain, we don't have a token, we're equity only business. We're chain agnostic, so we go wherever developer activity is. We don't just choose chains and also we're a centralized layer on these decentralized infrastructure layers, and so if a chain goes down, we'll basically cache the state of the chain and hold the transactions, and slowly, my engineering team's sitting there, I hope I'm saying this right, and we will post the transactions when the chain is stable again. And so the key to the next 100, 200, 100 billion is the infrastructure tools shouldn't pick the winners. The users and developers should pick the winners, and then we just build around that, right? But we are foundationally we don't want to be another blockchain. Because you're right, there's a lot, right? Now there's Aptos and Mystic Labs coming, and many others.
Last one. Same philosophy.
The other thing I'd suggest, and maybe I'm going to get booed out of the room, but maybe not everything has to be decentralized, right? I don't know if any of you guys use Farcaster. It's like a Web3 version of Twitter. Now I'm really talking my book because I'm a small investor, but it's super cool. If you go to the website, it says sufficiently decentralized, right? There's certain aspects, key part of the product that actually needs to be decentralized. Not all of it actually necessarily needs to be decentralized.
Infrastructure tools in Web3 should enable decentralization. They don't need to be decentralized.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what are you thinking about, in this space? What are some of the most exciting opportunities to build in terms of infrastructure? What's exciting for your teams now in terms of the initiatives you're pushing on, and really looking forward to delivering some of those solutions to the market? Maybe even a little preview behind the curtains.
I can start. There is just so much to build. I am in constant debate with my engineering team, how can we move faster, and constantly they're asking me, pushing back on prioritize, what can be really good. So when I look at the space, I feel there is so much tooling, so much infrastructure that needs to just get built out. Then you have all sorts of different challenges, which chains to go after. The conversation you're just having, I could go deeper into 1 or 2 or 3 chains and build the stack, the technology stack, or I can just try to support this one product that I built across multiple chains. And then you add the other dimension, which is back to what I was saying earlier, all the primitives. You just need to build that out, right? Access, custody, identity, payments. I'm missing a few more, and you need to start building these primitives. So a developer can just come in and pick those things and start building on top of that. So how do you take that? How do you abstract away the complexity that you have when building in this world and connecting it with the real world? That's where I feel there's a lot of opportunity for players.
So I've been lucky enough to have been early in the internet advertising age of lead generation, SEO, SEM, and then I was in mobile, now I'm in Web3. And one of the things that I've always seen is there's 2 kinds of people that enter these industries when they're really exciting and new, is the smartest and the shadiest. And so I think what I'm excited about is I think this last year will get rid of a lot of that shadiness, and will allow people that are actually driving to build real use cases and value in the space to build cool shit. That's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, from our selfish point of view, obviously, right? Crypto winter is bad, but if you're building an attribution system, it's good because, look, if money isn't free, suddenly acquisition costs aren't 0, and you actually have to sit there and ask, oh, wait a second, are all these token drops actually driving adoption of the L2 or the game or anything else? If you look at the numbers, it's often a little bit disheartening, frankly. But yeah, I second, obviously, again, the user monetization, there's a whole mechanism in Web2, if you're not familiar, that scalably makes it such that, look, I put in money and I get users in a scalable way. There's a whole iterative flywheel that has driven trillions of dollars of market cap. Everything that you see, Facebook, Google, Snapchat, Twitter, all of that fits into this cycle. And there isn't even one jump in Web3 of that cycle. And again, I hate to say it, but every form of human media, going back to the printing press, had some version of the system of advertising, reach estimation, audience targeting, all the rest of it. Web3 is not going to succeed without it. That's the reality.
So you've all had experience building infrastructure in Web2 companies. What do you see that's distinctly different about building infrastructure within Web3?
I want to say that people are a lot more open to helping each other. That is one of the best things that I've seen is all seas rise together, and there's a genuineness about it that I don't think I've seen previously. You know, the last hurrah of Silicon Valley in that 2010, 2018 was all about like, how do I get ahead and stab somebody in the back to get ahead? And that seems like it's different here.
I think dovetailing with that, I feel like the winner take all philosophy, right, isn't there in Web3. That's really refreshing for me.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of early Web 2, right? That it's like, Web 3 is this weird mix of like the open source movement, which was all these like beneficent hippies building all this stuff for free that all the internet's built on, but then also like this weird subset of like what pages speculators. It's an interesting mix.
So if we think about what will the world look like 5 years from now, if your teams are able to execute on their visions?
I'd be sitting on an island somewhere. Yeah, keeping it honest, yeah. You know, I think, so I'm the gaming person, so I'll stick to gaming. I think if you look at gaming over the last 3 or 4 years, if you look at just audience expansion, IDFA, cost of acquisition going through the roof and lack of innovation, I think this is the inflection point that you see every 10 to 12 years in gaming, a new medium that opens up the audience and allows you to continue to grow and actually make cool games. And that's what I'm excited about. I think over the next 5 years, you're going to see awesome games that turn into amazing communities that drive billions of dollars, and we just want to be a piece of that. We don't need to be the winner, we just want to be one of the winners.
I would say, like, you know, more use cases. Like today we talk about crypto, and when I was trying to explain it to my friends and family, it's like, oh, there's DeFi and there's NFT and like gaming is starting out now. I hope in 5 years we'll have a lot many more use cases, real life use cases coming out of this industry. So that's what one. And then again back to, you know, sticking to the panel here, I feel like the tooling part, like, you know, when I think of building in Web 2 today, you know, you're building an app, you have a lot of the stuff given to you through Android or through iOS, and like, you know, there's gazillion things out there that you can just go use, and the whole, you know, the cloud marketplaces, right? You have that figured out for you, so you can focus on actually creating value for users, and that is missing here. So once that is there, and then hopefully a lot more use cases. That's what I hope 5 years will see.
Yeah, in 5 years, you know, look, Web 2 and Web 3 are going to coexist for a long time, right? Like Web 2 is not going to go away, even in like the best case scenario. You're just going to have people seamlessly moving from legacy Web 2 properties to Web 3 properties and not even knowing they're necessarily moving in between them, even though the underlying blockchain technology is still there. It's just abstracted away in a big way. And, you know, hopefully the other thing I hope to see is that, you know, at least part of the interest for me for Web 3, and I suspect for a lot of the old Web 2 people, it's like, dude, I'm just tired of talking about the same 5 FANG companies. Like, I'm just, as much as like we miss Facebook, it's all great. It's like, dude, let's have some other big company in the mix. Yeah. And because like they all seem so old and slow. Like, I don't know how many of you read John Perry Barlow's Cyberspace Manifesto from the 90s. Now I'm really becoming like an internet boomer here. But he talked about the weary giants of flesh and steel, to which he was referring to like the industrial world versus cyberspace. And like, if we're being honest with ourselves after the third beer, like a lot of the companies we work for have become those weary giants of flesh and steel. And Web 3 is now the new cyberspace, and the internet is part of the old world that we're in many ways disrupting.
Yeah, it's like when we were coming up in Web 2, it was like nobody wants to talk about Intel and Seagate and all these other like... Exactly, there you go, that's why you transition. And so it's the exact same transition on this.
All right, and then shifting gears, it'll be my last question before I open up some questions for the crowd. You know, we're seeing something a bit unique happening with Tornado Cash, coming at a really critical time for Ethereum. The merge is upon us, and it feels like censorship kind of came in out of nowhere, as if nobody was thinking about it. How are you thinking about what's going on with Tornado Cash, and what do you think the relationship will be between censorship and decentralization?
Damn, you asked the 2 Facebook guys about censorship, huh? I honestly, like, I don't have a good answer. Like, to be honest with you, I don't know. The one cool thing about being at an early stage startup is you spend so much time focused on building the startup, you don't have a lot of time to read all of the millions of stories that are going on. And so, like, I don't have an informed opinion.
I mean, I've got a random view. I don't even know DeFi that well, but I'm sure everyone here has seen that XKCD cartoon about how like crypto heads think crypto works. It's like, oh shit, they used whatever, the SHA 2046 hash, whatever, we can't get into it. It's like, no, use this $5 wrench and just beat him over the head and you give them the password, right? Because the reality is that like, as big a fan of biology as the next guy in math is better than this and that, but the guys with the guns kind of win at the end, right? Because we're still living in a physical universe, and the singularity, as far as I can tell, isn't happening anytime soon. So we're not going to be uploading our souls to the blockchain anytime soon. So that's a collision that's going to happen. I mean, in my specific space, I see it in the privacy realm. And by privacy in Web3 usually means financial privacy. I mean like data privacy. I mean like GDPR. I mean the bureaucrats in Belgium, which is like the nightmare for every PM in Facebook. They spend half their brain space talking about GDPR all day, right? And somehow, like, to me, staring at Web3 is like, man, these are like two trains on the same track, and the only question is, when are they going to collide? Because they will collide. And so I don't know how that plays out. I think it's going to be exciting for one. We'll see. Yeah.
Another take on this is like, do they actually, in fact, did they even know what they're getting into when they started this?
No.
So it's just like comment trying to be in comment. Like they don't know all the implications. They thought that they could actually censor this, and then realize that it's actually going to touch the whole Web3 ecosystem. So it could be just somebody naive thinking about it.
Well, let's open up the some questions from the crowd. You mind if I borrow the microphone? Abhishek, start up here at the front.
This is a question for Antonio. You were probably the only person that had success debating Web3 on 3 cartoon avatars. I want to know how you went about that conversation, what kind of perspective you had, and what can we learn from that conversation with our conversations with non-believers.
Yeah, okay. Just put on my PM hat and set context for everybody. There was this podcast I did with Logan Bartlett, who's like this major Web3 troll, even though, by the way, Redpoint funds crypto companies, so I don't even know what the hell I actually pitched them when I was doing that. But leave that aside for the moment. He has this guy, Zach Weinberg, who made a bunch of money in ad tech early on, and I know before that, and we're pretty friendly. But then they basically get everyone up there and they shoot them down. And so it was like the big boss at the end of the Web3, game. It's like, can I take on Zach Weinberg? And so I watched every podcast to see his tricks. I saw the Packy interview where, things happened, didn't go great. And I don't know, I think I just managed to convince him. My thought, the victory there was A, at the end, he was joking, I want to invest. And then 2, the biggest thing was, you probably know Liran Shapira, this professional Web3 troll. He couldn't cut a disparaging video. What he does is he goes and takes a video from that out of context and it makes everyone look like fools. And he couldn't do it for that episode. So I felt like, okay, that was a win. But it was basically just, the thing is he worked in ad tech, so he gets the pitch. So you pitch ad tech and attributes oh shit, yeah, okay, I guess that's a good idea. So I think I had it easier than most. I think it would have been a lot harder for other people. Yeah.
I can ask, so what's the balance exist between abstraction for UX, right, but then also staying true to centralization, right? Where do you guys see that kind of shaking out 5 years from now? Because we're still using blockchain, right? So there's still some need for centralization somewhere. So what does that look like with all the stock of UX traffic on
the use case I always think about is can my grandmother use this? That is the most important part of anything, right? The people that are hardcore into a technology are always going to take the time to learn it. But what makes an iPhone special is literally, I was talking to an Uber driver that was driving here. Her 80-year-old mother can use her iPhone. That's when you think about UX, that's the most important part.
Dude, points for using Hegelian in a conference question. It's really quite amazing. We know each other. Sorry, that's why I'm razzing him. In my case, it's driven again in the data business. It's driven by privacy regulation. So, what if Spindle would be decentralized? The attribution system itself, right? Because it's basically a public utility that counts what happens on Web3. When it comes to things like your user data joined to that attribution system, that almost certainly has to be owned and centralized because someone has to take the GDPR bullet for it, which will be Spindle. Or one of our customers. And so in our business, regulation drives a lot of it. You decentralize what makes sense from a business and sort of spiritual perspective, and then what you're obliged to centralize either for engineering or legal reasons, you centralize that.
Cool. Other questions?
I don't have an opinion, but I do kind of wonder, coming to the Web2 side, why wallets are so important to the user sign-up flow. Because I've been involved, obviously, I've looked at every major Web3 consumer experience, researching my thing, and dude, if that was the new user sign-up at Facebook, Zuck would have like thrown you out the fucking window. Like, there's no way you would have built that as the user sign-up flow, and I'm not saying wallets are necessarily the problem, they need to exist for a reason, but I just wish it was more of a little seamless Google-style SSO process, and not some major cryptographic undertaking on the order of like setting up SSH on a new Linux box, right?
That's literally like, that's our wallet solution, is the Google sign up directly into a custodial wallet. It's the exact same experience as a Coinbase experience. Because if you go back to that like grandma test, that's she's gonna learn that more likely than she's gonna learn how to like connect her MetaMask wallet through her browser. She probably doesn't even know how to get to the right website on her browser.
Other questions?
So Atif, you've spoken a lot about like making, I guess, abstracting the blockchain away from grandmas and other folks. Just curious, like in the future, like looking 20 years ahead, do you feel like the average person will be Web3 proficient, or do you think, you know, your strategy will kind of play out for quite some time?
You know, it's hard to say, right? Like, what would you consider? What percentage of the population would you consider Web 2, like an expert right now, right? So I think, you know, at the end of the day, what we're going for is masses, and we're not going to have every use case, right? And so we're going for what we know it works in gaming historically, which is just easier onboarding. 20 years from now, like I said, I hope I'm sitting on an island. Outside of that, like I don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and what I've learned is like nobody knows what's going to happen in 2.5 years from now, much as that's 20 years from now.
The parallel I would say is that like the blockchain's it's gonna kind of be like the server box in Web 2. Like, dude, I remember running a web server on my machine at home, and like I'd go to my website and a little light would go on and I'd hear the disk go, right? And then over the course of 20 years, now we don't even think about that anymore, right? And it's just abstracted away. I think the blockchain is going to be that. I mean, it's a critical piece of infrastructure. If they go down, everyone's kind of screwed. But no one's ranked, like, just today, like we're doing the technical spec for the backend for this attribution system, and all the data tooling, to be blunt, kind of sucks on chain. Like it's hard to query anything in any sort of production capacity. It's like, do we need to run nodes and index the data ourselves? Those are the sort of questions you asked yourself 20 years ago. Do we have to set up the boxes ourselves? Like first versions of Facebook were sharded by box. Like that's the Yale box, that's the Harvard box, that's the whatever box. Like that's how you thought about it in the early days of Web 2, and that's how we're thinking in the early days of Web 3. I don't think people building in Web 3 are going to be thinking about change that much. It's going to be kind of wrapped away, and it's not going to be a first order concern like it is right now.
Otherwise, there won't be any evolution in the actual technology.
Right.
Just to add, like technology I have, I grew up in India, still a family there, I go there every year, and I've seen like a huge difference in the last like 12, 13 years in terms of the adoption of technology. And when I look back and like, you know, not everybody understands what it is and you know, how it's being built, or a smartphone or internet or YouTube, but they all know how to use it. They all are using it multiple times a day, you know, and they're all hooked to it. So I think it's going to be the use cases eventually that people use, and with that they'll understand the technology a little bit, but I don't think they need to understand everything about like, you know, how it's actually being built and used.
Other questions?
So this is a question for you, Antonio. Before you were mentioning about the flywheel of user acquisition, so I'm wondering what steps of this flywheel come first? What steps need to be built now to onboard the next 10K at least, or 100K?
Come work at Spindle and help figure it out, because like I'm not going to claim to have the answer. As far as I can tell, we're making it up as we go along. There's several steps to that. So the flywheel, just to review it a little bit in case people are kind of wondering like, what are we talking about? So the flywheel as it works today in Web 2 is like, okay, like we think this type of user wants to engage with our product or service. We go to Facebook and upload a customer list, or we use their targeting or whatever. We target 1 million people, 1,000 people come in, certain number convert, certain number don't, we learn something new, we iterate, oh, new creative, new campaign, and you get into this iterative like targeting attribution cycle, and if you hit a positive ROI, i.e. the LTV is higher than the CAC, i.e. the value you extract from the user is greater than the acquisition cost, you win, and if you run out of money and you don't figure that out, you lose, right? And that's how Web 2 has worked for 20 years. That is the game. From my point of view, every company in Web 2 is a marketing company with a little hobby called service, right? So from the total ad tech degen point of view, that's what these companies are. That world does not exist in Web3. And so how do you do that? What's the first step? Like I said, you click on a thing, you interact with the thing, you go to the chain within some reasonable period of time, you spend money, you interact with the chain, you provide liquidity to an exchange, you buy it in your platform. Like I tie it to the original event and say, hey, you know what? That Discord post was amazing, or the Twitter social media team is amazing, or the Facebook user acquisition campaign was amazing. That's the first step, right? And then the other step is like, okay, how do we retarget them? How do we deduplicate wallets, right? Wallets is a very fragmented thing in this space. That's the same problem with it too, by the way. It's like there's one person, there's like 15 wallets. How do you figure out the real wallet is, right? There's a lot of components to this. But these were all problems that got solved, again, very slowly in Web 2, to be clear. But it's, yeah, that's kind of the flavor of what we have to do.
Yeah, like the first step's got to be discovery, right? So if you look at what made mobile app advertising take off, was like newsfeed, right? Facebook newsfeed became a discovery platform. All of that ad targeting that couldn't be stopped, right? And so from my perspective, one of the interesting things that needs to get figured out in Web3 is like, what is the discovery mechanism for all of these different dApps and games, DeFi apps and all that kind of stuff. And so that's going to be the first step. Otherwise, you're going to go back to Facebook and Google.
Which, to be clear, would suck, right? If like
that's why, yeah.
Questions?
All right, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to kick off the next panel in 5 to 10 minutes.
likewise. We should chat more.